T. Continue. And I actually still have the person who I was matched with has been in journalism for decades, and I actually showed up to talk to her students at a few of her podcasting classes. So it's been a wonderful relationship that started thanks to the mentorship program. So I'm definitely a fan of it. So awesome. Well, I'm Julie. So I've been working in documentary, and documentary initially was my focus for years, documentary television specifically. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I got opportunities to jump into podcasting, and it was just, I immediately fell in love with it as a musician, as a dancer. I love the rhythm aspect of it, and also the kind of focus on the voice and people's stories, and not all of this other hullabaloo that goes around with TV and visual side, even though I still love it and love to watch it and support it. So right now, for the last 2 years, I've been working at A&E Networks, and underneath A&E Networks, there is the History Channel, Lifetime, and A&E. So I've been producing for things underneath all of those brands. And specifically, I'll be speaking mostly about my experience producing the show History This Week, which, if you don't know it, it's been going on for almost 2 years now. And every week we go back in history to something that happened in that week in history, and in a very narrative sense, tell you what happened and why you should care. I love it. It's very kind of history journalism. So what I'll talk about today will really focus on the skills that I use to interview experts and get the right tape and cut the right tape for our 25-minute program. Obviously, I've done all kinds of things. I also do a comedy show. I produce a comedy show. I've done interview style shows about health and wellness. So I can answer any question, hopefully any of your questions, just generally the things I've learned over the years. With that, I'll just jump in. So let me just pull up my notes and then we'll get going. So one thing, there's pre-interview, and then there's the interview itself, and then there's the post-interview. And there's actually different things to consider for all of these stages. So actually before the interview, I actually think it's really important to know what kind of tape do you want. If you're in film, people lay out their shots, the close-up, the medium shot, etc. I think in audio and in interviewing, you really want to know, because you're going to cut away from it, well, what kind of tape is it? So for example, you could ask, what happened next? Which will get you something different than, so when John walked in the door, who did he see? Which will instigate a different kind of answer. So thinking about exactly what do you want to hear back? What's the tape you want to use? How do you want to cut into it? That will really direct the kinds of questions that you ask. So that's one thing. Another thing is do your research, because that's actually will help you craft what kind of questions and what kind of answers, what kind of tape that you do want to get. So for example, I was doing an episode about the Mona Lisa theft from 1911, interviewing this awesome expert. And I knew, because of research I had done, that he had Mona Lisa socks. And so I prompted him in the interview to be like, I hear you have Mona Lisa socks. And he laughed and he said, oh yes, I have them. And but some people have bikini bottoms and I don't have those. And it's a really fun piece of tape that we ended up using in the final episode, which is out yet. It's coming out next week. But if you listen to the show, you're like, what episode is this? But you'll hear that piece of tape, and it's fun, it's light, it makes him a person, the expert a person, and it kind of gets you into the moment. So those are things to think about before you actually do the interview, among many things, but 2 things that stick out. And then when you're in the interview itself, everyone says, warming up your guest is so important. You want to make them feel relaxed. You want to connect with them. A lot of times I ask, where are you? Where am I reaching you right now? What's the room like? What'd you have for breakfast? The classic thing. Maybe make a connection. I was doing one interview and the daughter walks in the room, and we, instead of, rushing, I'm like, oh, well, hey, like, who you doing? Like, or what you doing? And, just kind of had like a 5-minute side conversation with the 8-year-old daughter that walked in the room. And those are things that kind of make them feel comfortable. And at the end of the day, you want tape that is lively, especially for me, because I'm working in documentary or more history storytelling. It can be very bland, and we want color, we want experience. And sometimes it can be through the details of the story, but sometimes it's through the character of the expert you're interviewing, which, of course, on the side note, is definitely something we always consider if I'm speaking. Let's say I talk to 8 experts and I only want to end up speaking to 1 or 2. One of the decisions I make is, well, could they tell a good story? Were they engaging? Were they excited about it? Because that will come across and be incredibly important for your kind of tape that you get in the end. So anyway, so warming up the guest, always very important. Don't feel rushed. Obviously, sometimes you are rushed, but try not to come across rushed. Another thing is I like to give my guests disclaimers, so they kind of know what to expect about how you run your interview. So one thing I always say is that sometimes I'll ask questions multiple times in different ways, and you might think, oh, this is getting me to the same answer, but I tell them, don't worry, I'm aware of it. I'm just trying to get a specific kind of tape. Or I use different words, possibly if they're not familiar with the word tape, but for the most part, trying to be like, don't worry, you're not crazy. I'm not crazy. This is all intended. So they kind of know that lay of the land. And then, of course, as you're actually speaking, as everyone says, listen, because you want to, if something makes you curious, if you're really listening to what they're saying, you'll go down a rabbit hole that may end up being really interesting. Obviously, you want to know when not to go down a rabbit hole that isn't relevant to the direction of your story. But nonetheless, if it makes you curious, it probably makes someone else curious. And that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned. If I remember something from an interview, or I'm like, it piques my interest, I like something, even if I've done the research, if it piques my interest, I want to well, let me make sure I understand this. Let me see if I can get some more tape about that. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And also, as you're asking questions, at the end of the day, the kind of tape we always look for is the stuff that provides color and personality and experience and feeling. Because at the end of the day, we as narrators can probably write something a little bit more interesting that helps you get through, the facts and figures you might need to know. So you really want experiential tape. I always want really experiential tape, especially when I'm working with history content. So I like to ask things about personalities for characters, what a space looked like, what it would have felt like. I'm doing an episode about this really interesting moment during the World's Fair that is kind of this kind of moment in history that actually was really important, but a lot of people don't know about. And so asking about, well, what was the crowd like? Was it big? Was it loud? How did people feel after the event? Those kinds of questions that will get you more interesting tape than just what happened, whatever kind of basic questions like that, which also are good to ask sometimes as a starting point. So once you've gotten that good tape, I always find after the interview, I immediately like to mark down the things that stuck out to me. So if I, that going back to the curiosity aspect, if I remember like the guy with the turkey hat that he talked about, I'm like, okay, that was a fun moment. Or I learned, oh, wow, I never knew this fact and it really surprised me when he told me it. I write that down. Just so I kind of immediately after the interview have a sense for what was interesting. So I'm not starting from scratch when I go to the tape. And then when I'm actually pulling the tape, for us, it could be maybe up to 4 hours or more of interview that we cut down to about 10 to 15 minutes of tape, maybe even less. And so really picking the good things, and that will not only motivate and push your story forward, but also keep people engaged is incredibly important. You don't want to waste any time. So things that sound good, that feels obvious, but listening and things that sound good to your ear and that pique your interest. If someone, honestly, even if it's an important piece of detail that someone shares, if they said it in a very boring way, or they sounded bored, I don't want to keep that. I'll say it myself, even if It would have been nice to have them say it. So that's one. And as I mentioned before, like picking selects that give feeling and experience or color. So for example, we had some tape. I was interviewing a Robert Frost biographer, and he had this fun anecdote how his wife said that he sounded like that he tries to sound like Robert Frost, and his wife was like, sorry to tell you, but you're not Robert Frost. And our host goes, how'd you take it? And he goes, oh, not well. And he laughs. And that's a moment where it's like, that's fun because it gives you a little color into this person. It makes you kind of smile. It makes you laugh. It makes you connect with them. And so that's a piece of tape that's valuable, even if it doesn't really like progress the story of Robert Frost or what we're trying to say. It's a valuable piece of tape to keep for kind of texture and color. So another thing as well, and this is like after you're really selecting tape that is, just the good sounding tape that is value add, that helps motivate your story and push it forward. I also, especially as a musician and dancer, as I mentioned, also think about rhythm when I think about tape versus narration or cutting between different people's tape. So I oftentimes also listen for tape that helps emphasize a point or a moment. So here's an example. So again, this Mona Lisa story. So the thief is about to get caught. And, I have the narrator, our host saying, talking about the footsteps are coming, you can hear them coming down the stairwell, and then transition to the guest to reveal who it is, like who is walking down those stairs and then what happens afterwards. So that's a moment that helps play with rhythm and anticipation to actually, kind of add value in a way that, back in my documentary and video days, maybe I'd use B-roll or a cutaway or a close-up shot or something like that would help give anticipation in this moment of excitement. So that's kind of, I think, the last leg of it, because really most important is the color of the tape and the feeling of the tape. And once you've kind of picked for that, then picking for rhythm, I think, can be a great kind of cherry on top to really make, your episode or whatever comes out a really experiential moment. Now, obviously, these are what I'm speaking to right now is very specific to, I have multiple experts. I have a host who's speaking. It's not an interview show. But I'll say about an interview show, even in that, when I do cut down interviews, sometimes from, 30 minutes to 10 minutes or 40 minutes to 20 minutes, like very often with my other show, even there, it's like, if it's not interesting, it goes, as everyone says, less is more. For my show, it's a comedy show. If I'm not laughing, it's out. If I'm listening to something and I laugh, even if it doesn't even if it's not that important for the story or whatever we're talking about, I'll keep it because it's the experience, like giving your listeners that experience of laughing and enjoying and connecting is really what you're there to do. So even then, as you're listening, what sounds right and what sounds good and what gets someone kind of engaged with what someone's saying. And usually it's the kind of smaller human things, of the laughter, of the crying, or I've had crying before as well, and you want to leave time for that. So yeah, so I think I said a lot and I hope I was clear. But I'm happy to take any questions or go down any other rabbit holes that piqued people's curiosity as they listened. So yeah.
Yeah, we invite people to, put your camera on and feel free to actually ask a question.
And no pressure.
Lily.
Yes. Hi, thanks, Julie. That was awesome. So many great tips. I guess I have two questions that just kind of came up when you were speaking. One is that when I record, and then when I say, okay, I'm, all done. Thank you for being here. We do a little thank you. Then usually I say, oh, how do you feel that went? Mm-hmm. And they just are so different. They just light up. Oh, it was so fun. It was great. I love the questions, and they're total energy shifts. instead of kind of maybe feeling a little bit more awkward or a little like pressurized. But since that tone of voice is so different than the rest, I'm hesitant to put it in because even the volume, like everything feels different. So I wanted to ask you, I guess my first question is, do you use that ever? And then how would you kind of fit that in to make it flow?
Yeah. So give me a little context in terms of like, is this an interview is it about a personal story? Is it something different? Just so a little context there so I know how you're fitting this tape in.
Totally. So my podcast is called The Wild Yoga Tribe. And each week I interview one yoga teacher from a different country around the world. So it's on their path of yoga. So their journey, their yoga philosophy, their methodologies, and their backgrounds and insight.
And so the idea is you want to use this piece of tape. Do you want to keep it at the end? Or are you interested in bringing it somewhere else
I don't know. I mean, sometimes I feel like, oh, I could tack it at the end, or, oh, it could be a good like middle, like zing in there, but I just wouldn't be sure how to, because then sometimes, of course, then like, oh, have you checked out this book? And, oh, I've been reading it. And so then it is context that would fit in well. It's not just, oh, it was so super fun. We then dive into something they're teaching or learning that's very relevant, but just that energy feels so different.
Yeah, well, I will say that's a real problem that I've had to deal with many a time where something's really good, but it just does not match. And that is either, then you kind of have to make a choice, you know, do you, sometimes like if it makes sense, writing into it, like writing something that like kind of, you know, warns the listener in a way that there's a different energy. You could be like, at the end, I asked her this and she just got so happy, you know, and then you hear the piece of tape or whatever. So it makes sense. And be like, and then we went back to talking about this or whatever it was. So sometimes using what I've used when tape is different is like, call it out, you know, in a way, like as a host, a narrator, like calling it out, and or making tough choices where sometimes it's like, you know, at the end of the day, if you think about, if you're listening to this, does it kind of confuse you? Does it take you out of the moment? If it doesn't, and it kind of can flow, which sometimes it can, then keep it. And then if it doesn't, then you kind of have to make a choice of what's more important to you, this energy in this piece of tape, or possibly, you know, a more kind of energy, even kind of experience. And I've had to make those choices many a time where it's like, you know, and obviously you can't keep all your babies as much as you love them, right? So it's kind of like making that choice, thinking about that listener. What will be most important as that listener? And sometimes it is the energy. And I've done it before where it's like, well, it doesn't quite match, but this is so good. We gotta keep it in and people are going to accept it and move forward. So it's kind of making those like kind of calls. And if you can't write into it to make it make sense, or whatever it is, or do a fake prompt question or whatever it is that makes sense, then you kind of have to just make that kind of, you know, risk benefit, you know, kind of decision.
Okay. Thank you. And then my second little question, do you mind if I ask you two in a row?
No.
Okay. The second one is, so I'm imagining if you said 4 hours of tape and you cut it down to 20 minutes. Sometimes I feel like when I'm chopping, I'm very worried about my questions being fluid and like it all piecing together. So I was wondering, do you do a lot of recording after to kind of get those right sound bites to help the flow as you're chopping? Or do you cut the tape super specifically to make sure that the flow is already there? Or do you ask so many questions to make sure you have the right question to keep the flow? Or
Absolutely. Well, you know, so for the interview shows that I have worked on and work on, you know, it really kind of depends. I definitely, you know, the best thing is I do like try to be like work with what I already have, because at the end of the day, you know, even if you get that pickup or you try to, you know, kind of splice something in, it may match well, it may not. You as the host and maybe producer can do it as many times as you can. So, you know, as opposed to maybe working with a different piece of talent, you know, different talent who maybe you have once. So in that way, I definitely try to reduce the amount of like splicing in. That being said, absolutely, if I have it where I've had to like, if for time, like, you know, a beginning part of this person's answer didn't make sense, and I really want to start in the middle, but that really meant I need to do a different question myself. Like, I've done that, because at the end of the day, you don't want to waste that time just so that you keep that flow. Because if that's 5 minutes or 4 minutes or 2 minutes of, someone's answer that you don't need, or maybe actually is value or like negative value for, the experience as a listener, it absolutely is worth it to like have a different question, do a pickup of sorts on your part to allow yours to jump right to that. Did I answer that question?
I think so. Yes. But if you have like a golden rule or like a happy tip or something, I'm definitely all ears for something that, like, do you pre-record 5 questions, or do you make sure you repeat 3 questions, or say, hey, as you said, you repeat it yourself a lot. So do you try intentionally to like say certain things during the interview to know that you can use them in case for flow? Or?
Yeah, well, I would say, to your point, I mean, I think that for flow, it's very much, having, like, I've done it with my, like, the comedy show that we have, like, there's certain words that are very easy transitional words, and that are like, and I've actually even done it with a guest tape. So, having, things like, having that like transition commentary that could help like kind of give that space where you can easily cut to something else, where you'd be like, wow, that was so interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Whatever it is that allow you to maybe like easily cut to something else. That definitely has been very helpful as I kind of cut between tape, like having just something that's kind of could go at the end or at the beginning of something, very generically. You don't want to sound, inauthentic, but, these are, I think, pretty authentic things to have a reaction to things that are, kind of a beat of reflection. So if that helps at all, that's something that has been helpful for me as I work with my hosts and my producers.
Thank you. That was helpful. I wrote down transitional generic copy. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So maybe always having a couple of those in the back pocket, the same setup, same everything, same day, same hour. I think just that's a good tip.
Yeah.
We had a question in the chat box. Julie, do you provide themes, questions, and topics to the interviewees in advance?
That's a good question. Some guests want that. I think it's a combination. You want that person to be ready. So whenever I speak with someone, especially if they, wrote a book on the topic 5 years ago, I'm like, well, maybe I should give them a little more heads up, because you know what, if they're not a teacher on it and they're not teaching about it, they may not, be as familiar with the details. And that's really important to us to have offhand, is to them to speak to details, characters, this and that. We don't want just general big ideas. So those are good too. But so in those cases, I actually just did this recently. I kind of gave a very like overview of, this is what we're going to cover. Here's our roadmap. I don't think I've ever actually given specific questions. Not that you can't, but it's a combination between the fact that it's not necessary to give them specific questions to prep them. It's also, they might prep that answer, which is not really what you're looking for in audio tape. That kind of then starts to sound like an audiobook, or podcast tape. So anyway, so that would be like my suggestion, is that sometimes I don't give anything, because if I know that they teach on it all the time, I usually pre-interview them before doing anything else. So I get a sense for like, what is their expertise and relationship with the material, and how do I need to prepare for this interview? And if I feel like they need a little bit more like refreshing before we talk, I'll definitely unprompted give them a little bit of an outline, being like, this is what we're going to talk about. And kind of do like the main, like, if I break down my story into 5 main, like, kind of action points or bullet points, and like, we're going to talk about this, and then we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about this person, and we're going to talk about the impact, and we're going to talk about, the long tail of this, so I'll do like general themes and categories. That way, they come prepared.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Julie, for all of that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hand things over to Anu to catch us up on the state of women, and then we'll break down into those small groups so we get a chance to meet and chat.
Great.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Please say yes. Awesome. Great to see everyone here. And some of you were at Podcast Movement, raise your hands. How many were at Podcast Movement? Awesome. So yeah, we just came out of a very intense week, and I wanted to share that we have a new directory that we just launched recently, and I'm going to see if I can put everyone here again. One second. In the chat thread, I'm going to share the link with everyone. These are people who are officially part of the State of Women podcast network, and this is in partnership with Sheconomy. The State of Women Institute, the main mission, it's a 501c3. Our ultimate goal is to amplify women's voices. We've been around for a couple years now and partnered with the Podcast Academy last December. So every month, once a month, we have these sessions where we come together, and we've been building out our membership of women podcasters and putting them onto mobile apps on Android, iOS, and iOS. And these apps are now designed to reach the bottom billion. And what that means is we recently signed an MOU with the UNDP in Bangladesh to reach refugee camps where women and girls don't necessarily have access like we do for Zoom and Hopin and these events and conferences, online education. We basically have all of our content saved digitally, and they can listen and learn, and they earn cryptocurrency. That's the ultimate goal, is to get them incentivized for learning, but it's also a way for us to help our podcasters increase their distribution into some of these areas where people have not really gone before. So this is a new platform. It's called iOS, and iOS works on dumb phones. So we're the first app of our kind, women-led, powered by girls, that's doing this, and happy to share that we just announced it at Podcast Movement last week. So the link that you see, there's categories, different topics. Some of you on this call are already on there. You'll be pleasantly surprised to see your podcasts already listed in our directory. So that's one of our updates. The other update is we've been holding a global virtual conference series called Amplifying Her Voice. And some of you have spoken on this call. Some of you have attended on this call. Some of you have actually moderated on this call. And we had 3,000 attendees over the past, I'd say 5 months now, and 550 speakers from 125 countries have attended through our virtual summits. So we're going to have our next one in November. I want to thank Lily, who's on the call. She was our interim executive director, who helped us through this whole entire process, managed it through a move and a new marriage. So she just really did amazing work. She's right there in the block next to Michele. And basically, we now have a platform that we're taking to Bermuda in November. So some of you have already expressed interest in joining us in person, and we're also going to be offering this virtually. So for those of you that are interested in speaking, the next opportunity is going to be in November. We're going to finalize the dates next week. We'll announce it in the September Lunch and Learn. And so that's some news that we have. Amplifying Her Voice, I'm going to attach in the chat thread. 1 second, is we've developed a website, and this is super cool, where podcasts are listed. People that are part of our network are also listed. So if you look at amplifyinghervoice.com, the tentative agenda, we just copied the Mother's Day. So some of you may see your names again. Bungai, that's you, for what we were planning with the government of Bermuda, but the official schedule will be coming out next week. So this is just a sample mock-up website, and we're going to be listing our new podcasts on the site itself, in addition to the digital library where some of you have already spoken. The site's live, so you can just check it out down there. And of course, the Podcast Academy was with us for all 3 of our Amplifying Her Voice summits. So we're really excited for what's coming up, really grateful for the partnership that we've had And so many of you, like I'll see you in the networking sessions, but we have a half an hour for those of you that are our members. I'll put a Zoom link at the end of this session. So if you want to continue on and talk about those events, we can. Thank you. Lily, do you have anything to say real quick to the community?
Yeah, thank you guys all for being here. It's always wonderful to be partnered with the Podcast Academy. And I know I always benefit from these calls so much because during my time here, interim executive director of State of Women, I launched my own podcast just a couple of months ago. So I'm certainly in these beginning phases and learning so much and so grateful for this partnership. So thank you all to everyone who came today. I hope you found it beneficial. And if you have any future ideas for topics or if you have an awesome guest you think would make, shed some light on something that we all could benefit from, don't hesitate to reach out to Michele, Anu, or me. We are all ears about potential guests and topics. And I know Michele also has resource guides. And, so if there's anything you want to do a webinar on or resource guide, the State of Women and the Podcast Academy would love to welcome you and all your ideas. So thanks again for being here.
Fantastic. This is great. And I too always learn a lot from these and really appreciate the State of Women for helping us pull this all together.